What's up, people? Welcome back to the channel. This is Jane here. You're welcome to a new video. In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing us how to draft this lovely dress. It's something that I've been wanting to do for a long time. This video is going to be split into two. This is going to be the pattern drafting. I'm going to show you the sewing tutorial in the next video. So this is the fabric that I'm going to be using. I have my lining, I have stay, I have the main fabric, and I'm also going to be using this pattern from the shoulder to the waist. Okay, this pattern from the shoulder to the waist. If you've not seen a video on how I drafted this pattern, I'm going to leave it in the comment section. Please, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, do well by liking and subscribing to the channel. Okay, thank you. Now, the first thing I have done is to trace off my pattern on a pattern paper. I've traced off from the shoulder to the waist without the stitching allowance. Okay, so I'm just going to drop this and set it aside. We are going to work on that later. So I've traced off from the shoulder to the waist for the front. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to get the hip level. So from my waist, I'm going to take my hip line, which is 9 inches. I'm going to go on to mark that across. Please note that your hip line differs from body type. Okay, so you should know what works for you and what your accurate measurement is, and then use it for your pattern. So I've drawn out my hip level now. The next thing I'm going to do is to get the length of my dress. So for the length of this dress, I'm going to be making use of 35 inches. So what I've done here is I've placed my tape from the shoulder line down to the point where I have 35 inches. Then I went on to mark that out. Okay, so I'm just going on to mark that out across the paper. All right, so bear it in mind that the front and the back length is not the same. The front is 1 inch longer than the back because of the side darts. So after taking out the length of the dress, I will go on to use my ruler to connect that point. So on the hip line, I'm going to take my hip circumference divided by 4. My hip is 40. Because we are working on an exaggerated hip, it needs to have that illusion of a curve on your hip. I'm going to add 10 inches to my 40. So 10 inches added to 40 is 50. 50 divided by 4 will give us 12.5. So I've gone on to mark 12.5 on my hip line and 12.5 on the length of the dress. Okay, then I'm going to use my ruler to connect this point. So from the hip down to the length, I use my straight ruler to connect them. Then from the hip to the waist, I used my curve ruler to connect these two curved areas together. Okay, so what I'm doing now is ensuring that I don't have sharp corners by the side. So from my shoulder down to the waist, I'm going to take my underbust line. So from the shoulder to my underbust is 13 inches. I'm going to mark that and also use my straight ruler to mark that across. So the reason why I'm doing an underbust is because I want to do an underbust tightening. You can decide to leave your pattern that way without adding an underbust. So right now, I'm going on to label what each of my lines are. So back to my underbust line, I'm going to take half of an inch on both sides of my dart leg. You can see already we have a dart running on the underbust area. What I'm going to do is to just take half of an inch on both sides. Yes, we're going to take half of an inch on both sides. Please, when you watch this pattern, you discover that this pattern from the shoulder to the waist already have ease on it. Okay, on the bust area, I have ease. So I need to take out some inches at the underbust area so that it will give us a nice fitted silhouette on that area. So I've taken half of an inch on both sides of my underbust, and then I've used my curve ruler to connect these two curves to create the bustier effect you see on your dresses, on your fitted dresses. Okay, so just go ahead and do this if you want to do an underbust tightening. After this is done, you now go on to bring down the dart legs to touch the waist. So from your underbust now, you're going to bring down those darts that you've marked to touch down to your waistline. So after that is done, the next thing you want to do is to come down to your hip line and you take your bust span divided by 2. That is your nipple to nipple divided by 2. Mine is 7.5 divided by 2 is 3.75. Mark 3.75. Then I'm going to extend the line upward to connect to the waistline. So on this line now, we are going to go up by 2 inches. We're going to be creating the dart, the hip dart. So go up by 2 inches. From that point, you're going to just go on to redraw your dart leg back into the waist. So from the 2 inches that you marked upward above your hip, you're going to go on to redraw it from that point back into the waist. Okay, once you're done with this now, once you're done with this, you're going to now go on to work on the armhole. So if you look at the picture we have clearly, you see that the dress has an armhole princess seam, and we need to draw that out. So go on to take your French seam, your French curve again, place it on your armhole, get a point at your armhole, place your French curve there, ensure that the French curve is touching your bust level. Okay, then you're going to draw a curved line that runs from your armhole to meet the bust level, like so, like you can see me doing in this video. I'm just going on to highlight that point. Ensure that you draw a line that meets your armhole, from your armhole to meet the bust level. After you've done this, next thing to do is to work on the neck opening. So also, if you look at the dress, you see that the dress has a high neckline. So the original neck width and neck depth we have, the original neck depth we have on this pattern will not work, because we need to create the high neck for this dress. So on your neck opening, you're going to go up by 1/2 inch, square that out. From your neck opening, go up by 1/2 inch. Then on your shoulder line, take your French curve. Okay, take your armhole curve. You're going to create a slanted line to touch your shoulder line on that point. So just watch carefully and see the way that I'm doing it. I've taken my armhole curve and I'm going to create a curve from the 1/2 inch I came in from my neck opening to touch the shoulder line I have in front. Then you see from the sides, I'm going to redraw that curve to touch the shoulder seam. So go back and take your curve again, redraw that curve to touch your shoulder seam, like so. So you can see that it's slanted towards the shoulder area, and it's also slanted towards the neck area. So now we've created the neck depth of this pattern. After you have done this, the next thing you would want to do is to add your stitching allowances to this. I'm going to add stitching allowances all around, except for the hem of the dress and also for the neck area. I'm not going to be adding any stitching allowance to the neck area because it's already high. I'm not really a fan of high neck, but because it's already high, I'm not going to add extra inches to it. But if you want to, you can go ahead and increase yours. So I'm just going to leave my neck opening like that. I'm not going to be adding any stitching allowance to it. So we have a side dart and we need to cut open one of the darts so that we can close the side dart. So we are going to be slashing opening the armhole line. So go on to slash open the armhole line so that you can be able to close your side dart. That is what I have done here. You would want to do that, otherwise your dart won't come out well. So after slashing that armhole line, we went on to close off the side seam, and I also went on to cut out one side of the dart. So what I will do next now is to go on to also cut out the remaining sides after adding the stitching allowance. So right now I've cut out the armhole. From the armhole, I'm going to cut out the sides all the way down to the hem of this dress. Okay, so just go ahead and cut out. I added just 1/2 inch by this side. Okay, so take note of that. You can decide to add more than that depending on what you're comfortable stitching on. So after cutting out the sides, I went on to cut out the remaining part of the dart. So when I transfer this pattern onto my fabric, I'm only going to be adding stitching allowances to these areas, to the areas where I cut off my dart. All right, so after that is done, I went on to also trim out the hem of this dress. That's the length of this dress. I'm going to be adding stitching allowance when I transfer to my fabric. I went on to cut out the remaining armhole. I went up to cut out the side, the shoulder seam as well, and also to cut out the neck opening of the front without any stitching allowance to it. So when you're done, this is what your pattern should look like. I'm just going on to tape down the side seam because we don't need it open on the pattern. So just go ahead and tape it down, and this will be it for the front. Okay, tape it down. This will be it for the front. When you take to your fabric, you're going to be adding 0.25 inch on the dart areas. So when you're done cutting, we are going to add half of an inch or 3/4 or 0.25 inch on the dart areas. Then we are going to be adding 1 inch for the hem of the dress. So onto the back, I have gone on to trace the back panel on top of a separate pattern paper. I've traced off from the shoulder to the waist without the stitching allowance. Okay, so the pattern that I traced off, I didn't trace with the stitching allowance. So now I went on to mark out my hip line and the length of the dress. On my hip, I'm going to take my hip circumference. Remember I said I had 40 plus 10, which is 50 divided by 4. That gave us 12.5. I went on to mark 12.5 on the hip line and also on the hemline, on the length of the dress. Then I went on to use my curve to connect from the waist to the hip and from the hip down to the length of the dress. Alright, so just go ahead and do the same thing you did for the front. So now after this, now I'm going to go on to take the 1/2 inch waist that we have on our original pattern. So I went on to mark my 1/2 inch waist dart on the waistline. Then I connected it to touch the chest area and also extended it downward towards the hip. Okay, so on the hip line I went up by 1 inch. That is where the dart leg is going to stop at. So from the waist I went on to connect the dart leg to touch that 1 inch before the hip line. So after that, now I went on to mark out the underbust line. But before we get to that, we are going to be extending the dart to the hip line so that we can create the back dart. So just go ahead and mark out the distance you have on your back. It has to correspond with what you have on your hip line. So I went on to mark that out. Then I squared up to touch the hip line, to touch the waistline, sorry. Then I also went up by 2 inches. So I went up by 2 inches for the dart at the back. Then I reconnected them as well. Okay, so after I've connected the dart now, the underbust line that I marked on the back of this pattern is because I wanted to separate this panel into two. Please ignore all of the lines you're seeing on the underbust area. It was a slight mistake. So on the underbust line of the back, I went on to take out 1/2 an inch on that area. I noticed that when I measured it, I had a little bit of excess in that area. So I went on to measure out 1/2 an inch away from that area, and I connected back to the chest line and also down to the waist. Okay, so this 1/2 an inch that I took out on that area is to just ensure that I do not have a lot of excess on that side. Already this pattern has ease on it, so having those excesses around the underbust area will not give it a close fitting, and I want this dress to have a very close fitting on the body. So after taking off 1/2 an inch on that underbust area, I went on to remeasure what I have there to ensure that it is still accurate with what I have in front, and it is the same. So after this is done, now I'm going to go on to work on the shoulder and also on the neck area like we did for the front. So like I said, please ignore all of the darts that you see running on the back. It's not important. We're only going to be working with the original center back dart that we have on the pattern. Okay, so right now I'm just going on to highlight all of my lines with my marker so that it is much more visible. Okay, just going ahead to highlight it so that it's much more visible. Now we are going to go up to the neck area like we did for the front. You're going to go up by 1/2 an inch from the shoulder line. Just mark out a straight line from your shoulder width connecting to the 1/2 inch at the top. When you've marked that out, you're going to take your curve ruler. You're going to just create a curve from that point to extend that curve to touch to your shoulder seam. Okay, after you've taken 1/2 inch up, just extend that curve to touch to your shoulder seam. When you've done that, for the back neck as well, you are going to just slant the curve to touch the shoulder line as well. So right now I'm just going ahead to extend my zipper line. So I'm just going to just create a curve in that place, in that area, to finish up the neck depth. So the neck depth of the front is just going to be sitting on the shoulder line like we did for the front. So this is like more or less like a turtleneck, both for front and back. So just connect the side seam, the curve down to touch the side seam, and that is it for this pattern. The next thing I'm going to do is to add my stitching allowances all around. I'm going to add 1/2 inch stitching allowance all around this pattern, and I'm going to be adding 1/2 inch for my zipper. So for the zipper area, I went on to add 1/2 inch for the zipper area. Then I have gone on to cut it out. So after cutting it out, this is what it looks like. I'm going to bring the front and the back so that you see what they both look like. This is what they both look like. I didn't add stitching allowance at the neck area. I'm not going to be adding at that area. When I take this to my fabric, I'm going to be adding 1 inch at the hem of this dress. That is at the length of this dress. I didn't add. I'm going to add stitching allowance at the length of this dress. So guys, this is what it should look like when you're done drafting. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please help by subscribing to the channel, like this video. I'll see you in my next one. Stay blessed. Bye.